Good evening and welcome to the smoking section. I'm Emily Ouija.
And Steve Helfer here.
Great to be here tonight with you, Steve.
Thank you for being here.
Now tonight we have a very special guest with us, actually on the air, not in the studio. And her name is Felicia Nimue Ackerman of Providence, Rhode Island. And we were introduced to Felicia Nimue's views through a great letter that she wrote to the Boston Globe on July 4th of this year. We are very impressed with this letter. This was talking about the recent push to raise the age for buying tobacco to 21. And so we actually invited the Felicia Nimue to join us via Skype. So we're going to welcome her. Just 1 second here. Good evening, Felicia Nimue. Welcome, you're on the air.
Good evening, I'm pleased to be here.
So I guess just bear with me for 1 second here. I'm still getting used to the controls in our new studio. So I mentioned earlier the letter that you had written to the Boston Globe. What actually prompted you to write this letter? If you can just give us a brief overview.
That I hope the view the letter expressed. That is, I was pleased to see somebody, while acknowledging the dangers of smoking, saying that it should be entitled to their own choices about their own risks.
I see. So is this an issue that you feel strongly about, that you've written about in the past? I know that you also sent me a letter that you wrote to the Providence Journal from 2011, which actually also touches on the way that smokers are being treated in society. So I was curious about this because I know that you mentioned in your letter to the Globe that you're actually a non-smoker.
Okay, first of all, that wasn't a letter, it was an op-ed. I write a monthly op-ed column for the Providence Journal.
Oh, I see, okay.
I've written occasionally about smoking, but I've written much more about restrictions on people's eatings, partly because I used to be fat, and I know perfectly well that it is loads of fun to eat a lot, and I think that people should be free to make their own choices, and I'm opposed to government paternalism. I think paternalism is for parents.
That's interesting. So you said that they used to be overweight, and that you
No, I said I used to be fat.
You used to be fat. Okay, sorry. I'm guilty of being too politically correct in that regard. So you used to be fat, and you said that you felt that there was pressure put to bear on you to lose weight.
I lost weight before the war on obesity, also known as the war on fat people, or it should be. But even at that time, fat people were not treated particularly well. And now I think it's especially dangerous that people talk as though it's harming the country if people are fat, even though, of course, if fat people die young, there's a good chance that they're saving the country. I'm not a health economist, so I don't have a lot of empirical information about that, but I've heard that argument made in many cases, both for fat people and for smokers. They may die earlier, but there's no reason to suppose that they die of more expensive illnesses. Or if there is, we need to hear arguments.
It's that's very true. That's an argument I've heard made very often about smoking, is that they cost the healthcare system so much money. And I think one thing I found just from my own experience when I try to raise that point in conversation, well, maybe they might die a little younger and they actually save money. People tend to recoil from that argument as if it's morbid to think about, which I think is kind of funny because the whole argument is kind of silly and morbid, but.
It's important because it indicates that we should not be scapegoating these people unless we have reason to believe that they cost society more money than other people do. And as I've said, I'm not a health economist, so I can't comment on that. I'm just raising the issue.
Right. What's
more, what kind of society do we want to be? A kind where everybody's life is monitored for how much money they might be costing society, or a kind where we're tolerant of people who take risks and have foibles?
Well, that's a great point, and personally, I really think that that's not really the reason why smokers or why fat people are being scapegoated. And I wonder if there's another underlying reason why. Do you think that we have some sort of need as a society to pick on a group of people?
I don't presume to know anything about the motives of strangers.
Huh. That's a good answer. Fair enough.
Well,
Fair enough.
The one problem that we have as Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights is people are always saying to us, well, what ulterior motive could public health people have, or anti-smokers have, but the good of society? And so we are put in a position where we're often asked that question, and that's one of the reasons Emily was hoping that you might come up with an answer to that.
I don't know, and I don't care what anyone's ulterior motive is. I think we have to judge policies by their effect, by whether they violate people's rights, by whether they do more harm than good. I don't see how I would know about the motives of people I have never spoken with.
So you mentioned, I believe I read this in a tagline. I believe it was a tagline to your op-ed, but I could be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong. But that you described yourself, and I'm paraphrasing here, as a liberal who wishes her fellow liberals were more opposed to the nanny state.
That was actually a tagline for a poem that was in the Los Angeles Times. The 2 years they had contests for what they called op poetry, that is, op-eds in the forms of poems. And they took 2 of mine. And in fact, I'll recite the one about obesity because it's relevant here.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
It's called The Fat Ladies Sing. We revel in our candy bars and cookies, cake, and pie. That vegetables taste wonderful is one humongous lie. But now we face admonishment. Our girth sets off a fuss. The war against obesity includes a war on us. We know our girth is plentiful, but listen to our voice. When thinking of our corpulence, why can't you be pro-choice? And I think the same thing applies to smoking.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that's that really kind of hits it on the head.
A lovely poem, yes.
It is, absolutely. Yeah.
Something that should be distributed to all schools of public health, I think.
I think so as well. I do wonder, and I know that I'm not asking you to speculate on this as a health professional in any way, but I do wonder at times what we as human beings value in our lives. Do we value absolutely living as long as is humanly possible?
I value absolute living as long as possible. That's why I lost weight, because I think the quality of life is much less important than the quantity. I don't want to die as young as my mother did, although she wasn't fat, and by the way, she was 100. To me, priority is simply to live a very long time. I also value very much having a cat. I see no reason to suppose that anyone else has to have these priorities.
Right.
So I don't think the issue is whether we as a society value longevity, but whether we will let each person make his own choice about what he values and act on it, as long as it's not trespassing on else's rights.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that got me interested in smokers' rights and in this struggle is the fact that I think some very underhanded tactics are being put into play in that. When indoor smoking bans were first introduced, they were introduced on the preconception that secondhand smoke was supposed to be bad for employees' health. And I think now we're seeing a lot of anti-smoking activists basically admit that the real reason behind a lot of those indoor bans was actually just to denormalize the act of smoking and to kind of force smokers to quit. So I feel like in that case, it's not honest motivations, and it's actually trying to almost brainwash people or influence them in order to almost forcibly improve their health.
I'm not sure I would go along with that. First of all, as I said, I don't know the motivations of strangers, and I don't think they're relevant. Second of all, brainwashing was what was done to Winston Smith in 1984, not what's done when people try to influence other people. I am not, as I said, a health economist or expert on this, but I see no reason to deny the scientific consensus that secondhand smoke is dangerous any more than I deny the scientific consensus about global warming, which is another area I'll let you know. I really don't think the issue of other people's motivation is relevant here. I'm in favor of restricting smoking in public places, but not private places. I'm also extremely opposed to taxation, especially for smoking, which is designed to make people smoke less for their own good.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think the taxation issue is very similar in some ways to the smoking bans being what I was saying was that many activists actually admitted that smoking bans are about making people smoke less. I think the same is true of taxation. And I think that to me that there's just something so dishonest about that, inherently dishonest. I also don't think that taxation should be used to control behavior.
Well, I mean, that's a politically philosophical issue. Should taxes be there to raise revenue to run the government, or should they be used as a nudge to get people to do things that the powers that be think are good for them?
I agree with you, and I wanted to point out that I'm very liberal, and I'm a strong believer in very high redistributive tax rates, but not as a means of proving the people who are being taxed.
And what do you think about the fact that a greater proportion of lower income people actually smoke? And I think in some ways they're the ones being most affected by high cigarette taxes.
I agree with that. I think the tax is regressive, and I oppose it. I would be very, very though to claim that there's a democracy going on. People who advocate increasing taxes for cigarettes admit that they want to discourage smoking. They're not denying.
No, they're very open about
What
that.
other purpose would they give?
And now,
They're being honest. I just don't agree with their goals.
and now we have taxes on sodas in Philadelphia, and I think California, taxes on sodas, to make people drink less
I'm
soda.
opposed to that too, and actually I should revise what I just said. It's not that I oppose their goals, I oppose their means.
Right.
I have no objection to people using non-coercive tactics to try to get people to smoke less. For example, to subsidize free anti-smoking things that people can decide or not to. I think that's fine.
Well, but the people in the public health departments throughout the world have said that for many, many years, they tried to get people to quit smoking through what they called education, but that not until they came upon secondhand smoke and its putative danger could they then say, well, you are not just hurting yourself, you're hurting other people, and then immediately or very soon thereafter begin to start where you could smoke, taxes on smoking, stigmatizing smokers, and they use this because they said, well, secondhand smoke was harming other people. It was no longer a personal choice.
That's not something I can comment on. I have certainly read anti-smoking people who feel very strongly and think very strong evidence that secondhand smoke is harmful. That's not something I can comment on. And as I said, I don't think it's hypocritical to admit that you're raising taxes to get people to smoke less. I just don't think it should be done.
That's true.
Well, I think, pointing again to your op-ed from the Providence Journal of 2011, Please Don't Dump on Daisy, which I thought was a really eloquent piece. That uses a fictional smoker named Daisy Johnson. And Daisy is a smoker, and you're asking people, please don't dump on Daisy just because she smokes. But I think what Stephen just said is actually a good clue as to why anti-smoking has caught on to such a large extent and why people are dumping on Daisy is because they think that Daisy is endangering their own health.
As I said, I don't feel qualified to say that I'm going to oppose the scientific consensus that secondhand smoke is harmful. Mm-hmm. I don't, in general, oppose any scientific consensus unless I have specialized knowledge, which I don't because I'm not a scientist.
No, I absolutely understand that, but I'm just saying I think it's a good clue as to why people are ostracizing smokers in such large numbers and why they have such negative feeling toward them. I don't think it's only because of the ostracizing effects of taxation and smoking bans. I think it's also because they've been taught to sort of fear for their own safety.
Possibly, although of course that would not apply to why people ostracize fat people. There's no secondhand fat.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, one of the reasons that they ostracize, that is used to ostracize fat people is, again, putatively they cost society money, and secondly, they set a bad example for young people.
Okay, I don't think anybody is obligated to live his life in such a way as to set a good example for anyone else. You should simply do what's right or wrong. And if you choose to do things that are risky, I think you have a perfect right to do it. The money issue we've already discussed. I don't think there's adequate evidence, or at least I should say, I don't have adequate evidence to know whether people with good health habits or bad health habits, society, or money. But I would not like to see coercion to make people do things of society.
Have you gotten any positive feedback from some of your writings within?
I've got positive and negative feedback, as everybody does.
Oh, you've gotten both.
Of course, who wouldn't?
And can you just for fun, could you tell us about some of the negative feedback you've gotten?
Well, here's an example. This is another poem of mine that actually elicited 4 hostile letters, 2 positive letters in the Providence Journal. It begins, it's called Take a Hike. Michelle Obama wants us all to jog or hike or swim, and savor local vegetables that keep her body slim. I voted for her husband, but did not appoint his wife, but to feed my kids or how to live my life.
That's great.
It's true that I voted for Obama. In fact, I'm a great fan of him, although not of her. And in fact, I don't have children. One person wrote in and called it a right-wing rant by someone who claimed to have voted for the president.
Wow.
I had an op-ed about that was called "There's Nothing Liberal About the Nanny State," and pointed out that you can criticize a Democrat for not being liberal enough. Another person asked what I had against people who were thin and fit, and I said that's like asking a pro-choice activist about abortion what she had against women who carried their pregnancies to term.
Yeah, great point. That's great. And I love the poem. That's fantastic.
I was wondering,
Didn't, as you know.
I read that poem, and I enjoyed both of them very much. Do you think it's remarkable how successful, in this particular case, we're interested in the smoking movement primarily, the anti-smoking movement has been able to change people's attitudes towards smokers and smoking? I mean, in 1980, I've been smoking all my life. In 1980, people didn't notice if I smoked or not. Now, I am a smoker, and it's like, it just seems in 35 years, it's been a tremendous sea change in the public attitude towards smoking, and it's been brought about by, to a large extent, government. Authorities, are you surprised at how successful they've been?
I certainly think it's true that the anti-smoking movement has been very effective. As I said in the Daisy op-ed, it's great progress that fewer people smoke, and it's come at a great price. And I'm not sure the price is worth it, because it's a price of stigmatizing and ostracizing perfectly decent people.
What do you think are the effects? What do you think are the effects on people if they're stigmatized?
And obviously varies from person to person.
Yeah.
Some people find it upsetting. Some people find it sort of exciting.
I mean, I'm really just asking more as a philosophical question, because it's something I wonder about myself too, and I think it's something that we still haven't yet seen all the effects of. And maybe over time we'll start to see more cumulative effect of.
But I mean, Emily is reading a book written by what is called a social anthropologist.
That's right. And I actually, I also told Felicia Nimue about this book.
I read the book, Smoke Free.
It's called Smoke Free.
She made some interesting points, but her writing style was so atrocious I could hardly get through it.
Did you actually read the book?
I read the book, yeah.
So fast?
How long does it take to read a short book?
That was very quick. I have not yet finished the book, so.
I mean, it's pretty dense.
Well, it's pretty hard going because she writes so badly, but she made some interesting points. Probably the most interesting one is that everybody assumes, in my view, rightly, that we should be suspect of data given by tobacco companies, who of course have an interest in making tobacco seem innocuous. But she said that nobody seems suspect of data given by anti-smoking organizations, and I think they have
absolutely. That was a great point. Absolutely. Yeah. I also thought that was an excellent point that she made. I also had some issues just so far. I haven't finished the book, but I sense that she's a little bit conflicted herself about smoking, because I think she opens the book by saying that she's an on-again, off-again smoker, and I detect a lot of that in her writing, that she has mixed feelings about it.
I thought that another interesting thing she said was that people seem to have trouble grasping. She was studying anthropologically, that they assumed that she was working on getting to quit, and when she wasn't, so she would go back to tobacco.
Right. It shows how black and white we've become in our perceptions of this issue. It's, you're either with the tobacco companies or against them, and there's no gray area.
True.
Do you think it's good to vilify, let's say, for example, tobacco companies? You know what I mean? They're certainly been vilified.
Vilify them for their dishonesty about the effects of tobacco, but not for promoting a risky product that some people enjoy. It's roughly as if, for example, people who promoted mountaineering gear for climbing Mount Everest claimed that there was no risk involved. Well, maybe they do.
That's a great point. Excellent point. Yeah.
But I mean, because right now we are talking about, are you familiar with the phenomenon of plain packaging?
I don't think so. I haven't heard that term.
Plain packaging is something that, for example, Britain has just put into, it's very popular, it's been promoted by the World Health Organization. You do not allow tobacco companies on their packages to put anything attractive.
Oh, plain packaging. I'm sorry, that was in the book. For some reason, I thought of you as saying blame packaging. In fact, the author pointed out that the packaging isn't really plain because people have to put warnings on it. That does not bother me as much. I am concerned about the rights of smokers and overeaters. I'm not really that concerned about the rights of companies to advertise. It's really not going to bother me if people do not get to put enticing pictures on cigarette packets. I don't think that's a great deprivation of the rights of consumers.
So you
it
don't
will
think-
bother
yeah.
me if people can't get cigarettes when they want them.
But it is a form of censorship, right? Would you not say?
I'm not really particularly upset of censorship of commercial speech. There's all sorts of censorship of commercial speech. You're not allowed to make misleading claims, for example.
But I do think that it further ostracizes smokers, plain packaging, because I think it's just another element of shame. I think about being a smoker is that you have to go to the counter, ask for your brand by name. You don't even get to look at it on the shelf, and then when you have it, it's covered in these gruesome pictures of diseased lungs with large slogans on it. You know, and you're out in public with this. It just sort of makes you feel more ashamed. I would think.
I think there were two separate issues here. I don't think it should be any harder to get cigarettes. You should have to ask for them behind a counter, although they shouldn't sell them to people who are under 18 probably. I'm really not particularly bothered if the packages look unappealing. For one thing, as somebody pointed out in the book that we were talking about, you can get your own nice little kits.
Yeah, I mean, of course that's true. I mean, you can put them in your own package, but I think the attempt is there to further stigmatize and ostracize.
Well, I think it's also a way to torment smokers. I mean, because in other words, anybody who buys a product of any sort, the aesthetics of the packaging is not altogether trivial. I mean,
Yeah,
you wouldn't want to buy a product that is in a package that will make you nauseous just to look
No,
at
but
the package.
I don't think that the warning should make you nauseous, but I think it's perfectly okay to say what the dangers are. To me, it's very important. How can I put this? Okay. I don't mind ways of discouraging things that don't interfere with people's rights. You may be familiar with the Sunstein and Thayer nudge, where, for example, one thing they point out is that it's perfectly okay to have healthy foods in the most convenient location school care is, that they might have to reach out and get something. So that doesn't especially bother me. It really doesn't bother me if cigarette packages are not attractive. It bothers me if cigarette prices are raised.
Yeah, an interesting perspective. I think I tend to agree with Stephen, though, that, that where do you draw the line? I mean, if people started putting, warnings on, I'm just trying to think of an example.
Well, we're not talking about warnings. We're talking about compelled speech that is designed to be repellent and even possibly nauseating.
Right.
That's where the government is not simply saying you have to put a certain amount of information. You have to put something on your package that is designed to be repellent.
Well, as a matter of fact, that's done with quite a lot of things. There's the Mr. Ick on various household, that may not be the term, but I think it is, various household products that are used to keep kids from, for example, drinking Drano.
The poison symbol.
I'm not bothered if cigarette packages look unattractive. That strikes me as a harm that people can put up with because it's not a big harm. I am bothered if people are forbidden to smoke in their own homes or if cigarettes are priced out of people's reaches.
Are you familiar with the Housing and Urban Development is proposing banning smoking in all public housing everywhere in the United States?
I think that's outrageous because it discriminates against the poor. After all, people who don't live in public housing are free to smoke in their homes.
Well, but the government, for example, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has been encouraging private landlords to prohibit smoking in their multifamily buildings. And not only that, they have been dispensing funds to local public health authorities in Boston, for example, to reward those landlords, private landlords, with federal money, reward them with federal money if they prohibit smoking in their tenants' apartments. and evict tenants who do not comply.
Here, I need to know more about whether if you smoke in your apartment, it really affects somebody in another apartment. I think this probably has an awful lot to do with how the buildings are constructed, and I'd rather see money distributed to landlords to make the buildings impermeable enough so this would not be a problem.
Or better ventilation.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Yeah, I would agree with you there.
I mean, there are empirical issues here that I don't feel qualified to comment on. If somebody living next door smokes and the smoke goes into my apartment, I think that should be stopped.
Yes.
I also wonder if there's some way to have him smoke in his apartment in a better constructed building so it does not go into mine. Certainly, I don't think the rules should be different from poor people and for rich people.
And one other thing that I've noticed though is just that as people become more and more opposed to smokers and smoking, I think that they become also much more sensitive to the smell of smoke. So I think there becomes this heightened awareness that we're
That's
seeing.
possible, but I've been sensitive to the smell of smoke all my life and I've always been about journalism.
Oh, have you? Yeah, that's interesting to hear. I mean, it's always interesting to hear people's perspectives on it.
I think we also need to distinguish between sensitivity to the smell of smoke and whether smoking causes medical harm. If secondhand smoke causes medical harm, and as I've said, I see no reason to dispute the scientific consensus that it does, there's a good reason to stop it the same way you would stop other things that cause medical harm, which often are not stopped. That's consistency. If the issue is simply that people don't like the smell of smoke, well, they might not like the smell of perfume either. It's not clear exactly how to adjudicate that.
True. It's often a gray area. I think part of being a society is that we have to balance the rights of people against each other, and also the preferences and sensitivities of a certain group against another.
I think all those things are true. I don't think we should assume that anything to restrict smoking is designed on spite to hurt smokers. But I don't think we should also assume it simply because someone.
Emily, we've got 10 seconds.
So we're
Felicia Nimue, thank you.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an honor to have you.
Well, thank you very much.